The mashed potatoes were still warm when she leaned back in her chair, wine glass in hand, and looked right at my mother. "You all think Daryl is some kind of saint," she said, laughing like it was a joke. "But if you knew what I really needed, you'd understand why I stopped trying." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. There was silence. The kind of silence that pulls the air out of a room and leaves only heat and blood rushing in your ears. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. My family was all there. My parents, my younger sister, and her new fiancé, even my Uncle Hank, who barely leaves the house since the pandemic. And Judith, my wife of 8 years, decided that was the moment. That table, that meal, that moment, that was when she'd set it all on fire. She didn't stop. "I mean, he's sweet," she said, gesturing lazily toward me like I wasn't even in the room. "But sometimes I feel like I'm married to a blank wall. No ambition. No edge. Just beige. Beige." That's how she described me. Like a throw pillow. A background color. I watched my dad blink slow and shake his head. My mom, bless her, tried to smile and say something to ease the tension, but Judith cut her off too. "No, it's fine. They should know," she said. "We're not okay. Haven't been for a while." I tried to tell him, but he always just folds into himself. Disappears. Like this little puppy waiting for a pat on the head. I need a man, not someone who gets winded hanging Christmas lights. That's when I stood up. Not fast. Not dramatic. I just stood. My chair didn't scrape. I didn't throw anything. I looked at the table, took one slow breath, and left. Walked out the door with nothing but the keys in my pocket and my dignity unraveling behind me like a thread pulled too tight. I didn't say a word. Not one. Not then. But if you think that's the worst of it, if you think a dinner table ambush was the peak of the betrayal, oh, you don't know Judith. You don't know what came after. What she planned. What she hid. And most of all, what I found buried in the drawer next to her yoga mat. When I walked out of that dinner, I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have my phone. It was still on the charger in Judith's purse, which now felt more like a vault of secrets than an accessory. I just kept walking, block after block, past houses where people were laughing, eating, living lives I assumed were normal. Not imploding. Not cracking at the seams like mine had just done. I ended up at a 24-hour diner. One of those places where the coffee tastes like it's been brewing since last week and the waitress calls everyone Han. I sat at the counter, ordered pancakes I didn't touch, and stared at the syrup bottle until the sun started to rise. My hands were still trembling. I knew it wasn't just about what she said. It was how easy it was for her to say it. Like she'd rehearsed it. Like it wasn't even emotional anymore, just delivery. And when you've been with someone for nearly a decade, you know their face. You know when they're holding back tears, and you know when they're holding back a grin. "Judith?" She looked free. Like she'd finally dropped a bag of bricks and was walking away lighter. "I got a ride to our house from a guy I used to work with, Marco." He didn't ask a lot of questions, just nodded slowly when I said I couldn't stay at the dinner. I think he assumed it was some kind of family drama. He didn't know the storm he'd just dropped me off in front of. When I stepped into our home, everything looked untouched. Too untouched. Like a real estate staging. The kind of fake perfection that hides something rotten beneath it. The lights were off, but there was a faint hum coming from upstairs. I followed it. Her laptop. Left open. Logged in. That's when the second hit came. She had a document open, a draft of something. It was titled My Freedom Speech. She'd written it. Edited it. Practiced it. Dated it 2 months ago. It was almost word for word what she said at dinner. Only this version? It ended differently. In the original draft, she planned to reveal his name. I didn't know there was a him until then. You'd think after what she said at dinner, that wouldn't be surprising. But it was. I thought it was just frustration, just emotional distance. Maybe even her lashing out. But no, Judith was already halfway into a new chapter while I was still rereading our last one. I opened her email. The subject lines hit like gut punches. "Can't wait for this to be over, Red Heart. Do you think he'll cry?" Dinner speech rehearsal update face with tears of joy. I recognized the name, Graham Kinley. Of all people, it had to be him. Graham was a marketing consultant Judith worked with on a remote wellness campaign. He lived in Portland. Visited twice. Had dinner at our place. Talked to me about hiking boots and craft beer like he gave a damn. That was 8 months ago. They were sleeping together then. They were laughing about me in emails. They had plans, long-term ones. I scrolled until I found a thread titled The Exit Plan. Inside was a color-coded document. Dates. Expenses. Flights. Photos of a rental home near Cannon Beach. I sat on the floor. I think I cried. I don't even remember. What I do remember is feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. Not just rejected, but replaced, erased, as if I'd been a filler scene in her movie. Something to skip. She came home later that morning. I was still on the carpet, still staring at that open laptop screen. She didn't even flinch. "Oh," she said. "So you read it." And that's when I realized Judith didn't just fall out of love. She planned my collapse like it was a corporate strategy. But I wasn't ready to collapse. Not yet. That came later, when I found what she'd hidden in the attic. Part 3 will explain everything. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in the living room with the laptop on my lap and the blue screen burning into my eyes. Every time I thought I'd scrolled through the worst of it, I'd find something more. Something colder. Something that made me feel like I wasn't just being left. I was being dismantled, piece by piece, like a project she couldn't wait to finish and walk away from. She went upstairs around 1 a.m., didn't even say goodnight. Just climbed the stairs like we were roommates who barely spoke. And maybe, in a way, we were. I sat in that room with only the sound of the fridge humming behind me and the occasional creak of the floorboards above. I think I aged 5 years in that silence. I don't know what made me go into the attic. Maybe it was the need to move. Maybe it was the fact that Judith once told me she kept private things up there, old journals, vision boards, whatever the hell a vision board is supposed to do for a person like her. All I know is, around 3 a.m., I climbed the pull-down ladder and stepped into the dust. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels suspicious. Like the attic was hiding something it didn't want me to find. There were a few labeled boxes, holidays, books, summer clothes, but one stood out. Unlabeled. Taped shut. Covered with an old blanket that wasn't folded like the others, just thrown over lazily like someone panicked last minute. I opened it. Inside were printed photos. Hundreds. Some in sleeves, some loose. All of her. Not with me. With him. Graham. Photos at an Airbnb that wasn't ours. A selfie on a beach at sunset with her kissing his cheek. Another where she was laughing, glass of wine in hand, sitting on a porch that overlooked a cliff. And the worst one, a Polaroid of her in the hoodie I bought her last Christmas, sitting on his lap, their fingers laced. My stomach turned when I realized she must have brought our stuff to his place. Shared it. As if none of it meant anything. There was a notebook in the box, too. A real, handwritten journal. I flipped through the pages, and every word carved me up like a scalpel. She wrote about how I bored her. How I used to try, but now I was just soft and safe. She called me emotionally toothless. She described the first time she slept with Graham as the first time I felt like a woman again. I sat back, trying to breathe. The insulation itched through my jeans. The air was dry and thin and full of dust, but it wasn't what made my throat close. It was the feeling of being a spectator in my own life. Like someone had swapped out the real mid-movie, and now I was watching the version where I was nothing more than the sad footnote in someone else's happy ending. Then I saw something I still can't explain. A small envelope. Unsealed. My name on the front, in her handwriting. Inside was a printed itinerary. One-way ticket. Her flight to Portland. The date? 3 days from now. She hadn't even planned to give me the dignity of a conversation. Not after dinner. Not after the journal. Not after the emails. She was just going to leave. Quietly. Clinically. Like someone backing up a hard drive and walking away from a broken laptop. And what shattered me more than anything? She planned it for after my birthday. I came down from the attic shaking. My legs barely held me. Judith was asleep in our bed, wrapped in the quilt her mom made us as a wedding gift. I stood in the doorway for maybe 10 minutes, watching her breathe, trying to remember the version of her who once cried during our vows. The one who kissed my hand when I had surgery. The one who begged me not to give up on myself when I lost my job 5 years ago. Was that woman ever real? Or just a phase? A character she played while waiting for the right exit? I went downstairs, packed a bag, took my car keys, and drove away. No plan. No goodbye. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning, my sister called crying. Judith had shown up at my parents' house. And she wasn't alone. Part 4 will explain everything. The phone rang at 7:12 a.m. I was still parked outside a 24-hour pharmacy, slumped in the driver's seat of my car, engine off, jacket thrown over my face like it could somehow shield me from reality. I hadn't slept. Just stared at the ceiling, thinking about that attic, those photos, her words, that plane ticket, her plan. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone, not even myself. But when I saw my sister's name on the screen, I picked up. She was crying. Daryl, I didn't know what to do. She just showed up, she said, voice shaking. Judith's at Mom and Dad's. She brought him with her. That guy, Graham. They're in the living room right now. What the hell is happening? I sat bolt upright, nearly cracked my head on the steering wheel. She what? They just showed up like it was casual. She said she needed to clear the air, that it was important the family knew the truth before rumors started. She said you'd probably be emotional and embellishing things. I didn't even respond. Just hung up. Started the car. Drove. The whole way there, I kept telling myself it wasn't real. Maybe my sister misunderstood. Maybe Judith was just dropping something off. Maybe, somehow, this was salvageable. It wasn't. When I pulled up to my parents' house, Graham's silver Audi was already in the driveway, parked like he owned the place. I had half a second to consider turning around, but I didn't. I walked straight through the front door without knocking. My dad was standing near the kitchen with his arms crossed, his face red in a way I hadn't seen since he got into it with a neighbor about a fallen tree. My mom was sitting at the edge of the couch, hands in her lap, white-knuckled. Judith stood beside Graham, smiling like they were announcing an engagement. She didn't even look surprised to see me. There he is, she said like she was greeting a guest at brunch. I told you he'd show up. Graham gave me a polite nod. Like he was meeting his girlfriend's ex for the first time. Like this was just a formality. Like he hadn't buried himself into my life like a parasite. I didn't speak. My throat was tight and dry. I just looked at my parents, my mom on the verge of tears, my dad seething, and then back at Judith. I was waiting for an explanation, an apology, anything. Instead, she delivered a speech. I know this must be shocking, she began, but it's important that everyone knows where I stand. Daryl and I have been drifting for a long time. We tried to make it work, but sometimes things just end. Graham and I have something real. I'm not here to shame Daryl or start a fight. I just want honesty. For once. My dad muttered something under his breath. Judith ignored him. She turned to me. You should tell them, Daryl. Tell them about how disconnected you've been. Tell them about how you shut down for months at a time. You left last night, and you didn't even try to talk to me. That says everything. I laughed. I actually laughed. That ugly kind of laugh that comes from pure disbelief. You're standing in my parents' house, I said, with the man you cheated on me with. And you think I owe you a statement? She didn't flinch. I'm not the villain here. I just stopped waiting for you to show up in your own life. That was it. I turned to my parents and said, I'm sorry. I should have told you everything sooner. But she didn't just cheat, she planned my replacement. For months. He's not just a guy she met. They rehearsed this. Graham finally spoke. Look, man, I know this is rough. I cut him off. Don't speak to me. Not in this house. He backed off. Judith rolled her eyes, as if I was the one overreacting. I left again. Same as I had at dinner. Quietly. No yelling. No smashing things. But this time, I felt something I hadn't the night before. Rage. Not the kind that explodes. The kind that simmers. That grows slowly, deliberately. The kind that looks for answers. I didn't want her back. That bridge was ash. But I needed to know how far this went. So I made a decision. I called a guy I hadn't spoken to in over a year. An old friend named Vic. He used to work in private security, did freelance tech work on the side. Knew how to find things people tried to bury. I told him I needed to know everything. Every message. Every meeting. Every dollar moved behind my back. He said, give me 48 hours. I said, take 24. The truth was coming. And when it did, even Judith wasn't ready for what it would expose. The next 24 hours crawled by like a fever dream. I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't think of anything except that smug look on her face when she stood in my parents' living room, turning my family into her audience like she was giving a TED Talk on emotional abandonment. I was replaying her words on a loop, trying to figure out if I had missed some moment, some shift in time when Judith stopped being my wife and became whoever that was. Vic texted at 5:34 a.m. the next day. Meet me. Don't look at this on your phone. We met at a park and ride just outside the city. He handed me a thumb drive and a manila folder, his face grim. You sure you want to read this? He asked. You already know she's cheating. What I found goes deeper than just that. I didn't even answer. I just took the folder and drove to a motel off the interstate, locked the door behind me, and opened my laptop. I spent the next 3 hours reading. Judith hadn't just been planning an affair. She'd been building a new life, one that started with making me look unstable. Vic had uncovered dozens of text messages between her and Graham that weren't just romantic. They were strategic. She had been rewriting our history over time with carefully planned lies, telling friends that I was struggling with paranoia, suggesting to her therapist that I was becoming emotionally manipulative, even writing an email to our bank implying that I might not be mentally capable of managing our joint finances due to recent behavior changes. She was laying groundwork, not just to leave, but to leave clean, to make sure if I ever pushed back, people would already think I was unstable. One text from her to Graham 2 weeks before the dinner chilled me to the bone. He's going to snap soon. I can feel it. Just a few more steps and I'll be free. Once people see what I've been dealing with, it'll make sense. Make sense? Make sense? I hadn't yelled at her. I hadn't hit walls or made threats or even raised my voice. The worst thing I'd done was cry quietly when I found an old anniversary card tucked behind a bathroom drawer 3 months ago. And now she was using my pain as evidence? But the folder had more. Financial records, emails, calendar entries. Judith had been siphoning small amounts of money from our joint account every week for the past 6 months. Just under the radar, never enough to raise an alert. But it added up. Over $9,000 gone. She'd opened a secondary account in her name only, linked it to a travel rewards card I never knew about. She used it to book their rental in Oregon. She even bought a burner phone, according to one of the receipts Vic found through an intercepted delivery confirmation. She was setting up a ghost exit. Vanish. Frame me as emotionally broken, claim she tried everything, and slip into her new life without a hitch. And then, the final gut punch. A signed document, her own version of a statement, where she anticipated the divorce and was laying out emotional grounds to request spousal support. She was going to leave me, cheat on me, drain our savings, destroy my reputation, and then hit me for monthly payments. I put the papers down and just stared at the ceiling for a while. My brain couldn't keep up. I felt like I was watching a horror film where I was the slow character walking into the dark basement. I thought back to all the times she smiled at me over coffee, the nights we watched old movies under a blanket, the time she held my hand in the hospital waiting room when I was getting checked for chest pains. Were those moments real? Or were they placeholders, scenes she had to sit through until she could cash out? That evening, I drove to my friend Raymond's place. I hadn't seen him in a while, but he was the kind of guy who always had a beer ready and didn't ask too many questions. When I showed him the folder, he looked at me for a long time and said, "You need to make a move. Fast. Before she pulls the rug out." I knew he was right. But it wasn't about revenge. It was about survival now. I needed to protect what little of my life she hadn't already rewritten. My job, my name, my dignity. So I started making calls. A lawyer, a financial advisor, my boss, and then one final call to Judith's employer. If she wanted to play games, I was done being the passive character in her story, but I wasn't prepared for what they told me, because it turned out Judith hadn't worked there in over 2 months. She had lied about everything, and what she'd really been doing during those business trips. That was even darker than I ever imagined. When Judith told me she had a week-long HR summit in Tampa, I remember feeling guilty for being suspicious. I even drove her to the airport, kissed her goodbye in the drop-off lane, and apologized for acting off that week. She smiled and squeezed my hand and said, "It's okay, babe. We'll be fine." I watched her wheel that silver carry-on through the automatic doors like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't flying directly into the arms of another man. Like she wasn't about to disappear from my life piece by piece. But according to the HR director at her company, Judith hadn't been employed there for 2.5 months. She'd voluntarily stepped away for personal reasons. They assumed I knew. When I asked for dates, the woman on the phone got quiet. She said she wasn't supposed to share confidential information, but given the circumstances and how tense I must have sounded, she finally confirmed it. Judith had resigned just 2 days after our 10th anniversary. So where was she going during those weeks she claimed to be traveling for work? What was she doing while I was home, making dinner for one and folding laundry she no longer wore? I asked Vic to dig deeper, and within hours, he had hotel receipts, travel records, and one piece of surveillance footage from a boutique hotel in Asheville that knocked the wind out of me. In the grainy, time-stamped footage, Judith was laughing at the front desk with Graham. They kissed. She jumped into his arms like they were teens. And later, entering the elevator, she leaned into him, pulled something from her bag, and, this part still wrecks me, held up the framed photo of our wedding day she used to keep on her desk. She brought that on their trip. It was never about guilt. It was about power. Vic kept finding more. She hadn't just been cheating, she'd been rehearsing. Writing fake work emails, creating phantom calendar entries, setting reminders to text me from her hotel room, while she was actually hiking waterfalls with Graham. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came when Vic checked her phone data backup. Buried in a folder of deleted messages was a thread between Judith and another contact listed only as Lynn. Turns out, Lynn was a divorce coach, not a lawyer, not a therapist, a woman who marketed herself as a transition strategist, someone who helped women exit cleanly from unhappy marriages without emotional or financial messes. Judith had hired her months ago. They had discussed how to document my emotional detachment and passive depression, how to seed doubt in our mutual social circles, and how to keep records that would sway any potential legal review. One line from Lynn stuck with me like a needle under the skin. Remember, it's not about what is true. It's about what can look true. They were playing chess while I was playing house. And I was done playing. That night, I packed up the essentials. IDs, insurance info, my laptop, the folder Vic had compiled, and the photo of us on our honeymoon that I once loved and now couldn't look at without my stomach churning. Then I booked a room in a nearby town under a different name. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. I filed for divorce the next morning. But I didn't do it quietly. I had my lawyer send the filing to both her and Graham. No gentle letter. No easing into it. Just the cold, sterile thud of legal reality slapping them both in the face. I also attached copies of the financial documents, hotel receipts, and screenshots of messages between Judith and her exit coach. And then I waited for the storm. It didn't take long. Judith called that night. 27 missed calls. 8 voicemails. The first few were angry, accusatory, blaming me for invading her privacy. But the last 2? She was crying. She wasn't sorry, not really. She was just shocked she'd lost control. For the first time since this began, I had flipped the board. And yet, just when I thought I was ahead of her for once, something happened that pulled the floor out from under me again. Because when I returned to the house to grab a few personal items, I found a letter waiting for me on the kitchen counter. Not typed, not formal, handwritten, my name on the envelope. And what it said changed everything I thought I knew. Not just about Judith, but about the man I'd become in her shadow. The envelope was unsealed. My name was written across the front in blue ink. Judith's handwriting, no mistaking it. She'd always written like someone who was trying to prove a point with every letter. Controlled, sharp, as if even her cursive came with terms and conditions. For a moment, I didn't want to read it. I was already so weighed down by everything. Betrayal, manipulation, the cold-blooded strategy behind it all. But some sick part of me thought maybe, just maybe, this letter would finally be her being real. So I sat at the kitchen table, the same place she once laughed with me about burning dinner and where we used to drink wine after long days. The same place where, 6 weeks ago, she'd said, "I don't know who we are anymore." And I thought she meant us. Not her and someone else. I opened the letter. It began with my name. Not Daryl. Not hey. Just you. That's how she started it. Like the rest of the letter was a continuation of a sentence I never heard. You always tried to be the good guy. The dependable one. The one who stayed quiet even when everything inside you was screaming. And maybe that's why this all happened the way it did. Because I got tired of being the only one who wanted more. She went on to say she never planned to fall for Graham. That it just happened. That he made her feel alive in ways I never could. But she still loved me. Just not in the way I needed. Or deserved. Or maybe at all. I couldn't tell anymore. She called what we had comfortable, safe, and then used the phrase that people use when they're trying to make cruelty sound poetic. You were my calm in the storm, but eventually, the stillness started to feel like drowning. She admitted she'd lied. About her job. About the trips. About how long the affair had been going on. But she swore, that she never wanted to hurt me. That the speech at the dinner wasn't meant to humiliate me, but to finally be honest in front of the people who'd always protected you from seeing how stuck you were. She wrote that she hoped I'd find someone who made me wake up again. That this would be my chance to finally live, not just exist. Then, the final line. Please don't hate me for doing what you never had the courage to. I sat there for a long time. Long enough for the kitchen to turn from morning sun to dusk. Long enough for silence to settle in like dust. At one point, I realized I'd been gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles ached. That letter didn't just reek of justification. It felt like a challenge. Like she was daring me to prove her wrong. To stay in this story she'd written for me. The safe one, the soft one, the man who wouldn't fight for himself. But something in me finally cracked. Not in an explosive way. No rage. No shouting. Just something internal that had been trembling for months, maybe years, and now, at last, went still. Quiet. Resolved. I stood up and took the letter, folded it, and lit it on the stove burner. I watched it curl, blacken, and turn to ash. And then I did something I hadn't done since college. I wrote a letter of my own. Not to her. To myself. A declaration of sorts. About the man I had been. The man I let myself become. The one I refused to stay. I wasn't going to let Judith's betrayal define me. But I also wasn't going to pretend I hadn't been complicit in my own erasure. I'd let myself shrink. I'd allowed her to lead while I trailed behind, grateful for scraps of affection. I gave her so many chances to speak the truth, and every time, she gave me a new lie wrapped in sentiment. It was time to step out of the shadow. But first, I needed closure. Not from her, but from one final piece of the puzzle. Graham. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't going to yell. But I needed to look him in the eyes, man to man, and ask one thing. Why? Why me? Why her? Why now? That meeting? It happened in a place neither of us expected. It wasn't planned. But it ended with something neither of us will ever forget. Part 8 will close it all. And trust me, this ending, no one saw coming. I didn't go looking for Graham that day. I told myself I was done. Done chasing answers. Done chasing ghosts. Done letting someone else's choices dictate my pain. But fate, or whatever twisted force was running this show, decided I needed one last act. Because later that week, I saw him. At a gas station. Of all places. I had just finished filling up, eyes heavy from lack of sleep and brain buzzing with the logistics of a new bank account, a new place, and a new future I hadn't asked for. And there he was, 2 pumps down, getting into that same silver Audi, looking like he didn't have a care in the world. Clean shirt, sunglasses, cup of coffee in hand. For a split second, I almost walked away. Almost. But something rooted me there. Not hate. Not jealousy. Just emptiness. I walked over. Calm. He looked up and did a double take. Oh, Daryl, he said, awkwardly clearing his throat. Didn't expect to. I know, I cut in. I just have one question. He shifted, uncomfortable. Okay. Why? He glanced down at his coffee. I don't think you really want the answer to that. I wouldn't ask if I didn't. He sighed and leaned against his car. Because she made me feel like the center of something. She talked about you like you were fading. She never made you sound cruel. Just invisible. And I guess I wanted to feel needed. Maybe I was stupid enough to believe she was being honest with both of us. Honest. The word tasted rotten in my mouth. I didn't plan to fall for her, he added. But I also didn't stop myself when I should have. And for what it's worth, I don't think she ever stopped loving you in some way. I just think she outgrew the story you two were in. Outgrew. Like a coat she didn't wear anymore. Like a season that passed and wasn't worth remembering. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. And left. I never saw Graham again. The divorce finalized quietly. No courtroom drama. No fiery confrontations. Judith got what she wanted. She kept the beach rental. She posted some cryptic photo of a bonfire with a quote about new chapters on her social media. People liked it. Some commented with heart emojis. I didn't react. I moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment above an old bookstore. It smells like dust and paper and the radiator clicks in the winter, but it's quiet. Peaceful. Mine. The truth is, not all endings come with epiphanies. Not all betrayals give birth to strength. Sometimes, they just stay with you. Like a bruise beneath the surface that doesn't fade but teaches you where not to press. I still think about her. Not every day, but often enough. I think about that night at the dinner table when she smiled and shattered me in front of the people I loved. I think about the years I spent believing I was loved. And sometimes, late at night, I think about the man I used to be, soft, quiet, always hoping things would get better. I miss him, but I'll never be him again. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with silence. And the slow, aching work of learning to live again.